J'ouvre maintenant la séance. Bienvenue à la réunion.
I am now going to open our meeting. Welcome to our meeting. Standing meeting number 19 of the Standing Committee on Transport, Infrastructure and Communities. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motions adopted by the committee on Thursday, September 18th, 2025 and December 11th, 2025, the committee resumes its study of the changing landscape of truck drivers in Canada. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the standing orders. I would like to make a few comments for the benefit of witnesses and members.
Speaking. For those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you are not speaking. For those on Zoom, at the bottom of your screen, you can select the appropriate channel for interpretation, either Floor, English, or French. For those in the room, you can use the earpiece and select the desired channel. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. For members in the room, if you wish to speak, please raise your hand. For members on Zoom, please use the raise hand function. The clerk and I will manage the speaking order as best we can, and we appreciate your patience and understanding in this regard. I'd now like to welcome our witnesses, colleagues appearing before us today from the Alberta Motor Transport Association. We have Mr. Robert Harper, President. Welcome to you, sir. And we have from the Canadian Council of Motor Transport Administrators, Ms. Linda McCausland, President and Chief Executive Officer. Thank you both for taking the time to appear before us today. I'll begin with opening remarks, and for that, I'll turn it over to you, Mr. Harper. You have 5 minutes, sir. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Chair and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to contribute to your study. Why are we here? The Alberta Motor Transport Association provides health, safety, and other services to over 18,000 members because of our mission to advocate, educate, and innovate on behalf of the Alberta transportation industry. AMTA is here because Driver Inc. isn't just a tax or misclassification issue. It's about safety, worker exploitation, and economic competitiveness. Driver Inc. has flourished because of lax oversight of the scheme. Many have unethically and illegally benefited by underpricing competitors by 25 to 35%, using threats and intimidation to silence competitors and employees from exposing the scam. The Driver Inc. business model relies on lower costs, primarily by underpaying their employees. These deceitful tactics spread to other areas of operations, creating a toxic culture of cutting corners, eroding safety through weakened maintenance, poor or fraudulent documentation, and reduced training. The scheme effectively eliminates the conditions designed to trigger workers' right to refuse unsafe work, ultimately impacting public safety. The AMTA supports the current and sustained CRA and ESDC measures to ensure compliance by all companies, irrespective of size or industry. The AMTA is grateful for the measures taken by the federal government requiring T4As and the added resources to investigate misclassification. The federal measures are aligned with provincial initiatives to conduct and increase coordinated on-road enforcement inspections and to shut down fraudulent and unsafe operators, driving schools, and their instructors. The measures taken are greatly welcomed and need to be sustained and coordinated federally and provincially across the country to continue to reverse Driver Inc. We also support further steps taken through CCMTA to deliver one Canada-wide NSC carrier profile, which will help to identify and eliminate chameleon carriers, commonly used by those who employ Driver Inc. to deceive enforcement and believe a nationally created and funded database is required to achieve optimal impacts to improve safety and compliant operations. Additional fuel for the Driver Inc. model comes from the temporary foreign worker program. These workers, hired under the guise of legitimate employment, have been coerced or enticed into Driver Inc. subcontractors. These individuals paid tens of thousands of dollars to better their lives through employment in Canada, only to find their future livelihood hinges on silence, compliance, and abuse. This resembles modern slavery. While employee misclassification is known as an income tax and cost avoidance scheme, the committee should also be aware that GST tax fraud is an important component accomplished through carriers' interline freight GST paid to Driver Inc. subcontractors. This transaction is not an eligible GST credit, but the carrier claims the non-eligible ITCs, meaning taxpayer dollars, are being used to finance this illegal scheme. In the last decade, increases in payroll costs and regulations have contributed to the Driver Inc., making the Driver Inc. model more lucrative. Current net zero regulations are adding unsustainable costs for many legitimate carriers to adopt and meet current mandates. Mass adoption is uneconomic, as it requires fleets to source units costing at least twice conventional vehicles, then remodify for operational use. For technologies that lack supporting infrastructure, Canada must reform the current greenhouse gas emission model, the GEM model, to reflect the limited availability of compliant options and to reflect operational usage, specifically allowing practical lower emission technologies. Because thousands of workers who operate commercial heavy-duty vehicles, especially in our resource-based sectors, will have future employment and economic opportunities lost. In closing, eliminating Driver Inc. isn't just a tax or labor issue. It's about correcting Driver Inc.'s abuses of Canadian taxes, our safety culture, and workers' rights, while protecting competition for legitimate carriers. Cost pressures that have driven the Driver Inc. scheme are significant across the Canadian economy. By eliminating enforcement gaps and modernizing regulations, we can protect drivers, enhance public safety, while supporting the growth of a strong and competitive transportation industry. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Harper. Next, we'll go to Ms. McCausland. Ms. McCausland, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes for your opening remarks.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity to present today. I'm happy to give you an overview of the Canadian Council of Motor Transport Administrators. We are a non-profit organization whose membership is comprised of provincial, territorial, and federal government senior leaders who administer, regulate, and oversee motor vehicle transportation and highway safety in Canada. For over 85 years, we have provided members with a forum to collaborate and respond to road safety priorities by promoting efficiencies for drivers and vehicles. Our board is comprised of representatives from Transport Canada, provincial and territorial transportation departments, public safety and service agencies, and public insurance corporations, and is accountable to the Council of Ministers responsible for transportation and highway safety. In the late 80s, with the deregulation of transportation, there was a need for cross-Canada harmonization and reciprocity in the management of commercial vehicles. In 1987, the federal, provincial, and territorial ministers responsible for transportation and highway safety signed an MOU to develop and implement a national safety code to encourage road safety, promote efficiency in the motor carrier industry, and achieve consistent road safety standards across Canada. CCMTA is the custodian of those NSCs. The NSC is a set of 16 standards, including determining driver fitness in Canada, hours of service for commercial drivers, safety ratings, facility audits, and entry-level training for Class 1 commercial drivers. Designed as a comprehensive code of minimum performance standards for the safe operation of passenger and commercial vehicles, the NSC provides guidance for legislative, regulatory, and administrative action, and specifically focuses on responsibility for the operation of commercial vehicles on the road, including trucks, buses, tractors, and trailers. All provinces and territories choose how they will use the NSCs to inform their commercial vehicle regulatory and legislative framework, but they are not obligated to do so. The CCMTA does not have any regulatory or legislative authority, and we do not provide any oversight. With respect to commercial vehicle safety in Canada, our most recent priorities include working with jurisdictions to complete a review of NSC 7, carrier and data profiles, NSC 14, the safety rating, and NSC 15, facility audits. These standards are the framework for commercial vehicle safety oversight. The review will identify amendments to the National Safety Code standards, which will be brought forward for approval to the Council of Ministers. We have established a national committee of provincial and territorial auditors and investigators to identify problematic carriers and to share information and best practices to effectively and efficiently act on problematic carriers. We are working with jurisdictions to ensure they have a more robust and timelier national carrier data by enhancing and optimizing our carrier data exchange system. We've established a new working group to identify opportunities to coordinate national efforts to address the misclassification of commercial vehicle drivers known as Drivers Inc. through making connections with relevant agencies and public education within the mandate of CCMTA. And we are developing guidelines for NSC 16, Commercial Truck Driver Entry-Level Training Class 1, to support jurisdictions in working towards a more consistent application of this standard. We've worked very closely with our industry partners on these initiatives, and for the most part, they are generally supportive of our work. We are committed to working with our members to improve commercial motor vehicle activities in Canada, to have the safest and most efficient movement of people and goods by road in the world. And I thank you for your attention and look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Ms. McCausland. We'll begin our line of questioning today with Mr. Albus. Mr. Albus, the floor is yours. You have 6 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I thank both of our witnesses for the work that you do every day and for coming to answer some of our questions here today. I'm going to start with Mr. Harper. Mr. Harper, thank you to your province for giving the Conservatives such a wonderful welcome at our convention. I'm sure you had everything to do with that Chinook, so I'm just going to attribute it to you. But getting to work, sir, Minister Dreeshen, the Minister of Transportation for Alberta, has, over the past 6 months, closed a number of driving schools and a number of trucking companies for a variety of reasons. Do you look at that as being a good thing?
Absolutely. The provinces, as I've made in my note, they have been looking at doing NSC audits, checking whether people are compliant with the regulations, and have shut down a number of trucking companies, as well as schools and driving schools that are not operating as per standards. So this is positive for the industry, and I say it has to be coordinated both provincially and federally.
So when it comes to coordinating provincially and federally, many of these operators can simply just transfer the assets into a different company and apply for a new safety fitness certificate. It might even be within Alberta. It might be just going across to my province of British Columbia. Is that a concern for you?
It is. That's the reference to chameleon carriers. What they call about is basically you just change your colors. You've moved from jurisdiction or reincorporated a company. So yes, the NSC standards need to be, and we need better data sharing in a database between provinces to keep track of those companies and the directors, so that we're not reincorporating. There's been significant, accidents where company was shut down and then incorporated in another province almost immediately.
So do you believe that when a new company applies for a safety fitness certificate from their province, that there should be some requirement to disclose who their directors are, who the beneficial owners are, to determine whether or not these are chameleon carriers?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Could you please explain the GST issue? Because I know the CTA has raised the issue of taxation being subverted in the Drivers Inc. model, but I hadn't heard GST before.
Yes. When most freight is subcontracted, the original contractor is the only one who pays freight. So in the Driver Inc. model, what they've been doing is paying the Driver Inc. subcontractor GST. And we've seen pay stubs where essentially it's just paid as a revenue source. It's not GST. It's not a GST eligible ITC, but the carrier claims the ITC, knowing that the Driver Inc. will neither either remit it as GST or they'll include it into other income, which means they're getting 100% credit on one side and at most marginal tax, but at worst it's zero. And in Alberta, that's 5%. In Ontario, we're talking HST, say 13%.
Okay, well, I hope our analysts are taking note of that. When it comes to driving and experience, we had a gentleman from Ontario come and talk, and he said last week, therefore, we have harvested drivers who are simply not skilled, they're not safe, and they're not aware of it. They're getting themselves into trouble with easy, minor situations that not an advanced driver, but a medium-trained driver should know. It sounds to me that a lot of the National Safety Code 16, for example, which is recommended but is not an actual law, seems to be an issue. But it's also been raised to me that transportation of dangerous goods, right now, if you have a license to drive, you can drive a heavy load. You could be even transporting dangerous goods without some sort of formal recognition of what is required. Do you believe that there needs to be more standardization for when someone can transport something, let's say transportation of dangerous goods? And should a company specialize in that? Should there be something that separates them away, that they have more experienced drivers and can handle those loads, and that should be recognized maybe outside of the regular licensing process?
I think any type of those certifications on top of a license are valuable. So we support having those, graduated steps in a licensing process. But, the key point about the Driver Inc. one is they tend to flout training, and because of subcontracting, they're pushing subcontractors to do work that they wouldn't otherwise be doing.
Okay. Alberta has been well known for overhauling their mandatory entry-level training program. As much as I'd like for the rest of the provinces to emulate that, do you believe that National Safety Code 16 should actually have some force of law, that maybe there should be a condition that maybe is attached to the safety fitness certificate when someone becomes that they are going to only allow a certain amount of training because right now it's province by province, different patchwork?
Again, I mean, we support the provinces having jurisdiction over this, but yes, we would support that it becomes more standardized.
Like Alberta?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you very much, Mr. Alves, and thank you, Mr. Harper. Next, we'll go to Mr. Greaves. Mr. Greaves, the floor is yours. You have 6 minutes, sir.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning to our witnesses. Thank you for being here. I'll start with Mr. Harper as well. Appreciate you being here, sir. We've heard a lot of witness testimony in this committee from witnesses from Central Canada in particular, a lot focusing on the Ontario context and actions that the Ontario government might take to try to address the Driver Inc. Scam. In that vein, I'm wondering if you could speak more to what specific actions you feel the government of Alberta might be able to take to complement the federal government's crackdowns on misclassification.
Well, I'm not here really to speak about what the Alberta government should do, but the Alberta government has been taking part on some of the inspection blitzes that were done at scales, which involved intergovernmental, departmental surveys to make sure that we identify common Driver Inc. One of the comments we came, because we had asked, I think these blitzes had started was, we believe these are happening, and some of the, when the Alberta government does the inspection at the scale, they're sort of surprised that what we tell them, oh geez, the indications as we see these drivers at the scales are, yes, they probably are Driver Inc. We're surprised it's at the high rate, like in the 30% range of carriers that you suggest it is. So that's helped to validate what we said. But I mean, looking at the driving schools, looking at licensing, looking at NSC audits are really the levers the province has to look and identify Driver Inc. and then to go after the federal government for not collecting enough taxes on companies that aren't remitting income tax.
Okay. Thank you for that response. Can you tell us what you think would be the way to send the strongest signal about increasing enforcement? We've heard a great deal from other witnesses about how there just isn't a lot of on-the-ground enforcement, and there's a culture of impunity in many instances that seems to have grown up within parts of the trucking sector. What kinds of actions, in your view, could be taken most immediately that would signal a seriousness to addressing this problem within the sector, that would be received as such by those working in the sector?
There are audits that Canadian Border Services and ESDC should take. We had instances where people on temporary foreign worker permits were terminated by an employer who came in on their permit. A week later, they're working at a Driver Inc. company and bragging about it through a Facebook chat when they should have been absolutely not working in the company. How they were, I sent some documentation to CBSA and was said, please don't send us this information. Also looking at GST audits, like go through these companies and see, well, here's what GST you paid. What companies actually are you entitled to interline freight? And then go after who was paid the GST and find out whether they remitted it or declared it as income. I mean, there has to be a lot of just enforcement of tax and audits on these issues in the driving company. And, quite frankly, we brought this up last year, and some of the members of my board and the Canadian Trucking Alliance seem to be the first ones audited, not the people that we were concerned that should be audited. So that they seem to focus on the people who are more likely to be compliant than the people that we've indicated are targets for enforcement.
Okay. Thank you. If I have another 3 minutes remaining, lots of time. Good morning, Ms. McCausland. Thank you so much for being here. I wonder if you could elaborate on the question of data sharing. This is something that's come up a great deal as one of the impediments towards effective enforcement. Could you speak more to what the obstacles are that you see to effective interjurisdictional data sharing?
Yeah, happy to. So we have a carrier data exchange. It was developed over 20 years ago, so very limited in the information that's provided. And in order to exchange information, it has to be in the same format, the same fields, the same sequence of names need to be identified, and there's been very little attention paid to it for some time. The board of directors has acknowledged that, and we have a big project underway to update the carrier data exchange and the information that we exchange and how we exchange it. So the first steps are updating the 7, 14, and 15, what's actually included in the carrier profile, what information can we include to eliminate the carriers who shop across the country when they get a bad rating. We're looking at our carrier profile and the inputs to that. We've identified that it's very different across the country, and we're looking at how we conduct audits, and we're doing a complete rewrite of NSC 15. And as we start to identify the changes to the NSCs, we're working on developing a system that can exchange information more effectively across the country.
Mm-hmm. Would it be fair to say, in your view, that given the nature of the data sharing challenges and given the nature of jurisdiction around this issue, that having the provincial and territorial governments willing to participate in some kind of data sharing mechanisms is essential for this information to move freely and effectively?
I would agree, and I would say at the board we have that agreement. There are big obstacles in some jurisdictions. Some jurisdictions use a spreadsheet format. Others have very advanced corporate systems, so having that exchange, we need to lift the minimum as to what we're collecting and also how we're collecting. So it's a factor of IT changes, regulatory changes, and resource requirements.
Thank you very much, Ms. McCausland, and thank you very much, Mr. Greaves. Prochainement, nous avons M. Barcelou-Duval. À vous la parole. 6 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you. Mr. Harper, in your opening remarks, you identified that there's an issue of extortion and abuse under the Temporary Foreign Workers Program. It was identified before your appearance too, but there are people who mention that targeting immigrant workers and drawing this link between that and between the TFWP would be racist, and that it wouldn't be a good thing to only act on this issue when it comes to looking at those particular issues around temporary foreign worker programs. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on that.
So there are Driver Inc. that are not temporary foreign worker. The Driver Inc. model has enticed drivers because they're not being taxed to actually phone employers. We know of instances where they say, do you do the Driver Inc. model? And they say, well, I don't want to work there then. So it's not just temporary foreign workers that have been working in the Driver Inc. Now, the reason that the temporary foreign worker program is open for abuse is, again, in many instances, we have people who come to work in Canada because they've paid an amount to a consultant outside the country in order to get a job in Canada. And then once you've done that, now you've invested in working. You're open yourself. If the employer doesn't like how you do your job, or whatever you say, they can deport you in a minute, and whatever you've invested is down the drain. So part of that abuse is having a program where it becomes a pathway to citizenship, and I think that's really when the government looks at the program is a pathway to citizenship is what's opened a lot of the abuse to the temporary foreign worker program. If you're not paying to get in the country, you are just working here. Maybe it comes to points for future application for residency, permanent residency, but I think that's really what's opened the abuse. And again, people have, like, once you're in, like, we had a housing shortage. I've heard from taxi drivers in both Ottawa, Winnipeg, telling me about trucking companies where there's many people living in a house because they're truck drivers, paying exorbitant rents. They're abused with rent. They're abused with paying their training costs, which is not legal. They're abused by hours. we know of people who, on electronic data, ELDs, that record the driving. We have people have been hired at some of our members, and the first thing they ask is, well, okay, I have one ID here to enter my data, my hours, but where's my second ID? My old company, the Driver Inc. company, had me enter so I could drive more than my regulated hours by having a second ID. So we know the abuses are going on, and again, it's public safety, it's the employees, it's the competitors who are acting legitimately and complying with the law.
Merci. J'ajouterais peut-être là-dessus, est-ce que vous pensez...
Thank you. Do you think that it's normal that there are people who are not citizens who might be here through the temporary foreign workers program, who might be asylum seekers or who might be on student visas, who integrate the trucking business and function within a system that they're not necessarily familiar with? They may not be aware of the laws. They have very little driving experience in this country, and then they're told, well, you're on your own, and nobody is responsible for them because there's a corporate screen between the Driver Inc. and the corporation. Do you think it's normal to allow this? One of the proposals that we put forward was to forbid the incorporation of people who are not citizens or permanent residents. In other words, when you have a temporary work permit, you should not be allowed to be incorporated. You have to be salaried. Would you be in agreement with that type of suggestion?
Absolutely. Under the work permits, most of the time you're supposed to be an employee. On the temporary foreign worker program, you're supposed to be an employee. The fact that nobody pre-qualified the employers to see that they actually hire employees and then checking up on the employer later to make sure that they were actually paid as an employee. Like, you're not brought in as a temporary foreign worker to work as a contractor, you work as an employee. And that's clear in the work permit, and it's clear in the requirements. But the fact that nobody follows up on it means that it opened to abuse. So yeah, we shouldn't have people being incorporated as employees working as drivers. But there's a question of also incorporation is the T4As will only catch those drivers that are incorporated. There are people who are operating who are not necessarily incorporated. They're just being paid as a separate contractor. So that wouldn't necessarily catch those people either.
J'ai une autre question pour vous parce que vous avez fait
I
référence
have another question. You referred to companies that may close and then reopen under another name in the same province or a different province. One of the recommendations that we made would be to create a shared data system for infractions and also to maybe establish a blacklist of trucking carriers. Do you think that would be a good idea? Because it's often the same people doing this.
I think, again, having shared information, and this is the problem with the chameleon carriers, it's very difficult to check between jurisdictions currently because we do not have, we share information between a lot of the jurisdictions, but it tends to be slow. And, if you're identifying the principals, directors, I think that would help identify when companies are changing.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Harper. Merci, Mr. Barcelou-Duval. We'll start our second round, deuxième tour, avec Mr. Lawrence. Mr. Lawrence, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes, sir.
Thank you very much. My questions will be for you, Mr. Harper, and we're going to focus on the GEM program, which up until your testimony I don't think we've heard anything about. And so if we could just start by you describing what the GEM program is, the greenhouse gas emissions model that is.
So the GEM model requires, starting January of 2025, trucks in the heavy industries to meet certain greenhouse gas emissions limits. And certain things can be purchased on trucks that limit the greenhouse gases and get credits. Some of the vehicles, they buy these low resistant tires on it, which get a positive credit. when they import them into Canada, they immediately replace the tires because they're not good for snow and they're not good for off-road in the resource sector. We also have in the resource sector, these vehicles are often used sparingly, probably 10, 20 hours a week, but they're treated like they're run 40, 50 hours a week like a conventional trucking company. And these people are when they can't afford these trucks or find them available, and often they can't. It's based on a California emissions regulations back the EPA developed in many years ago now that they've reversed on. But they have to, they'll buy these vehicles they'll buy one high-priced new vehicle in order to buy another vehicle that they can actually use. So they're parking some of these vehicles that are high cost so that they can do work in the resource sector.
So it's your testimony, if I'm not putting words in your mouth, that the GEM program or the taxing based on CO2 emissions or carbon pricing is driving up the cost for legitimate truckers and probably
Correct.
not having much of an impact in terms of reducing carbon dioxide emissions. Is that correct?
That's correct, because they're not practical. And there are, lower emission technologies, the compressed natural gas, CNG, that shows a lot better promise, but the current regulations are zero, not better. So trucking companies are not are hesitant to invest in the technology, so it's time limited. So it'd be easier if they acknowledge that there are better options.
And so, in terms of a nexus between the GEM program and the Drivers Inc., my thought here, and if I'm understanding, is that if you are a legitimate truck company, you're much more likely to have to comply and take on the additional cost of compliance, as opposed to if you are a Drivers Inc. model, which we've seen has been associated with worse maintenance, GST avoidance, CPP payment avoidance. This would be yet another cost that they could avoid. Meanwhile, the legitimate carriers would have to incur. Is that correct?
Yes, that's our testimony.
Thank you very much. I'll end my questions there. That was very interesting, and I hope the analysts took note of that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lawrence. Next, we'll go to Mr. Kellaway. Mr. Kellaway, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks for the witnesses being here. Really appreciate it. And spent a bit of time in Calgary, not last week, but I was in Calgary where I taught and went to school. So mad props for Calgary. And I'm really happy that you're here. And we've heard so much in the lines of testimony from a broad cross-section of folks, from sectoral groups to organizations to individual business owners to those that have horrific stories to tell about how accidents and preventable accidents cost lives of loved ones. Very heavy to hear, but important to hear. And so, Mr. Harper and Ms. McCausland, thank you for joining us and continuing this discussion. There's a couple of things that I wanted to pick out, and Ms. McCausland, I'll start with you. When we're looking at recommendations that go forward from this committee, there's some consistent themes. One of them, you talked about a national database that would work between the provinces and those jurisdictions and the federal government. The provincial government would most likely implement that. I'm just wondering, in terms of how do we ensure that each province does that? Do you have any thoughts in terms of? You would think that each province would do that, everyone would take part in it, but I'm looking at the mechanics of actually getting the provinces on side with that. Your thoughts on that?
I would say for the most part that the provinces are on side with that, and that they've given me the mandate to update and invest money to develop a system. They've made resources available to update the NSC standards so that we are getting more consistency across the country in the way information is collected and what information is collected. The next step would be to develop a system that they could use. We're not proposing a database, we're proposing a data exchange system.
Okay.
So we have that now for vehicle identification numbers, and it's just a way for systems to talk to each other. And that's what we'll be looking at. We don't want to own the data or house the data, but we want to provide a venue so that we can, in real time, exchange data across the country.
Okay, so it would be very intuitive then, real-time data.
That's
Okay.
the intent, yes.
Okay. That's really interesting because that's something that's coming up time and time again. I'm sure you've been watching
Yes.
the testimony in terms of what recommendations that would give this put forward solutions to address some of the common things. And Mr. Harper, I really appreciate you bringing up the Drivers Inc. model, that it's not specifically a newcomer issue, but a multiple groups and individuals are taking part of that. And you talked early on in your testimony about the gaps in terms of enforcement. It was one of the many things that caused my jaw to drop was the number of schools that are providing training, 48 hours worth of training, and then individuals going out and being able to drive on Canadian roads. In some cases, that was brought up, I think, from an Ontario witness perspective. In terms of the enforcement piece, can you specifically, like, a year from now, if I were to talk to you and I would say, what were those 4 or 5 or 3, whatever the case may be, enforcement items that really improved the situation? Because I'm cognizant that the Drivers Inc. model, there needs to be adjustments, and we're doing that as a federal government. More needs to be done. But on the enforcement piece, it seems like every testimony that we heard or every other testimony, boy, it seems to be quite lacking, and the men and women are doing their best. But what could we be doing better today? If we had an infusion of money, a infusion of direction, what would it be?
Well, I mean, we talked before. I mean, income tax,
Yep.
cramping down on the income tax, the ESDC reviewing people who are, what is an employee, and I mean, we're already making hopefully strides to that regards. We had an issue, a year ago when we brought up some of this and talked to ESDC. When they got a complaint from a particular employee, they would go and assess the employee. Yes, you're supposed to be an employee, but they wouldn't look at any other people in the organization. I think they're changing that. So that has to be done. And then, those driving schools and really need to be looked at to make sure that they're legitimate. And, when people are giving out licenses, they need to make sure that the person is trained to do what they do. In Alberta, they've set up a pathway program where it's 3 steps. Step 1, you get information. It's sort of similar to the MELT, meets the standards of MELT. And then step 2, you learn how to drive interprovincially. And before you get an endorsement to drive it extra provincially, you have to do another bit of road test, show that you've met some more standards and improved where you had your first driving it. So
Thank
I
you
think
very
those
much.
ones need to happen.
Thank you, Mr. Harper. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Harper, and thank you, Mr. Kellaway. Monsieur Barcelou-Duval, à vous la parole. 2 minutes et demie, s'il vous plaît.
Mr. Barcelou-Duval, 2.5 minutes. Thank you. Ms. McCausland, I'm going to start with you. There are road controllers who testified and mentioned that they had observed that there were gaps in the regulation on service hours. For example, if there are several users within the electronic logging device and the license doesn't match the username exactly, then they don't necessarily have the powers to take that vehicle off the road. They also identified another problem. They were not able to identify the modifications that may have been made. They would need access to the electronic logging devices in order to see what changes were made. So I bring this up because I have a question on how the standards are decided. Is it decided by the federal government, or is it in collaboration with the provinces and territories? How does it work?
That we have are developed by consensus by the board. We have a program committee who own the specific NSCs, and they come together to make recommendations to the board on those changes, and that ultimately goes to the Council of Ministers to get their comfort. How they're implemented within each province or territory is at the discretion of the province. We are a federated model, so there isn't legislation that guides the NSCs. There isn't a regulatory power. Each province would then take what's within the standard and choose how they would incorporate it into their own regulatory regime.
Peut-être une autre question pour vous, c'est qu'on a aussi
Another
soulevé
question for you. Several times, the necessity of sharing data has been raised. We need to share data when it comes to violations, to businesses, to a registry of carriers with the types of vehicles, the licenses they have, etc. If we were to set up a registry of this kind, would it be your organization that would naturally be the organization that would take charge of that initiative? Or is there another organization?
We're currently working on a data exchange system. I think that would meet what you're looking for, and that the jurisdictions would have a line of sight as to what's going on within each of the provinces and territories. The problem is it's not consistently gathered data, nor is it shared in a similar system. So that's what we're working to upgrade now.
Thank you, Ms. McCausland. Merci, Mr. Barcelou-Duval. Now we'll go back to Mr. Albus. Mr. Albus, the floor is yours. 5 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you again to our witnesses for your testimony. I'm going to be speaking to the CCTA, so Ms. Mick Oslin, is that correct? Right. Thank you. So in 1954, the federal government gave up its role in terms of extra-provincial enforcement and essentially said to each province, you know, you can enforce the rules under your motor vehicle acts. So this created two things. Number one, it abandoned the field, so to speak, and left it up to provinces to enforce any federal rules, which there were few, because they essentially said go to the Motor Vehicle Act. And then it created regulations, and each province created its own structure. And so that's why we have so many problems in this country between interprovincial barriers to trade. You can't drive through my province during the day, but you can drive through Alberta at night, or vice versa. It's hard to keep track of them because there's so many of them. You can't take a snow plow. You have to take the plow off and put it in the back. And in some provinces, you can't have it in the back. You have to have it on the side. And it's almost insane the amount of regulations that we have. Now, it seems to me CCMTA is created to kind of deal with these kinds of things. Why do we still not have a baseline for extra-provincial mandatory entry-level training? Why is National Safety Code 16 still just a recommendation and not something that everyone abides by?
We developed NSC 16 in 2019, went live 2020, and its intent was to be a baseline of training that each province would commit to. And I can say that each province has met the minimum requirements of MELT. Being a new standard, we know that there's more that we should be doing. So there is work underway to take a look at how it's being applied in each of the provinces, where the gaps are, and develop tools to help provinces to be more aligned in how they administer NSC 16.
Is there any guidance on being able to do that training on either official language?
It would be in both official languages, yes.
Okay. No, that's just helpful to know. Now, when it comes to the system that you said, I understand it's an ancient legacy system. Who pays for that? How does that system, is there an agreement where every province writes a certain check, or is it something that the federal government pays, or how does that work?
CCMTA manages and operates it on behalf of the provinces. We get membership dues from each of the provinces, and it's run from the coffers of CCMTA.
Okay, so it's ultimately taxpayer run, though, correct? Like you run it, but the taxpayers from each province pay their part.
Well, you also have an inter-provincial records exchange program that exchange data and vehicles, and we charge programs and companies to access that, and some of our revenue comes from that system also.
Okay. When you are having your discussions as a body, does the issue of insurance and some of the concerns that Mr. Harper as well as other trucking associations have, do you bring them in? Do you talk to them about these issues? Or is it just a government discussing between governments how best to deal with the problems
3 of our members do represent insurance. We're public insurance where insurance is public. So Manitoba, Saskatchewan, BC, in Quebec, we do have representatives from insurance. I have a very strong relationship with the Insurance Bureau of Canada. I meet with them regularly. So there is an awareness of the impact.
Okay. Do you think that there is some room, though, because, for example, we've been hearing that there's issues in Ontario, particularly with facility insurance. We've heard from victims in Quebec that essentially, or victims as well as tow trucks that can't get compensated. Do you think that there needs to be more minimum standards when it comes to insurance for extra-provincial trucking?
I don't really have an opinion on that. It would be an input to the work that we do. But what
Is there any plan to look into that formally as an organization?
We look at insurance as a factor of the work that we do all the time.
Okay, well then, wouldn't you have an opinion?
I'm doing what my board has asked me to do, and we engage with the insurance sector regularly.
Okay, well, I would just encourage you to ask your board maybe to look into that, because that is something this committee has heard over and over again, and it's causing all sorts of issues in a very good industry. And how much time do I have left, Mr.? 40 seconds. So I'll just quickly to Mr. Harper, thank you again for your testimony here today. There's a number of family businesses that have been around in my area, the Okanagan, for decades, if not longer. And it was, and it shall be, hopefully again, a place where you can work and raise a family on. And maybe I'll just leave it to you to make any final comments in regards to the profession itself.
Well, that's a very good point. This has been a good industry for people to make a good living, and it is really impacting those people who've dedicated their life to, building a good business, treating their workers properly. And nobody likes to see scammers succeed at the price of those who are trying to operate within the law.
Thank you very much, Mr. Harper. Thank you, Mr. Albus. Mr. Kellaway, the floor is yours for the final round.
For the final round. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And, again, we're coming to the end of, or close to the end of testimony on this particular topic, an important topic. And I'd mentioned that you've been following the testimony over the number of weeks that we've been doing it. So I'm really interested at this point to hear from you just in terms of, during our testimony, have we been missing anything? Have we not been asking certain questions that we should be asking? That'd be one. And Mr. Harper, you tilted your head like you might have a thought or two on that. And then I think that'd be for both of you. And the second piece would be this. When we're writing our report, ultimately, we're going to have a number of recommendations. And what would be the recommendations that you would want to see in there that addresses so many different things? I know, from databases or data exchange, to enforcement, to tax reform. But I want to get a sense from you, have we been asking the right questions? Have we missed certain questions that you think we should be asking? And the recommendations that when you open up you go to your computer and you check this report when it's finalized, what you want to see in terms of the top recommendations to improve this study and ultimately make it more applicable on the ground. So, Mr. Harper, maybe we start with you.
Thank you for the question. It's very open-ended. And the reason I tilted my head was I haven't given it that broad of a thought. But I would start by saying, as you've heard the testimony, you've probably heard how many aspects of Driver Inc. are involved. Insurance, tax fraud, employment fraud, health and safety, and how many different agencies are involved. And, this has, in terms of the worst aspects of Driver Inc., it's certainly been a very big pathway to organized crime entering Canada and the trucking industry. And the question is, do we have adequate laws to deal with such a nexus of a problem like they do, I would say, in the United States, where they have racketeering laws?
Right.
That would be one of the things I would think the committee should probably consider, whether this is such a broad-based, it attacks here. Do we have the tools in Canada to address something that is really a racket, that they're not just doing one thing, they're doing a multitude of crimes, a little bit here, a little bit there,
Right.
abusing people, whether we have those tools within Canada to deal with such a complex network or scheme to defraud citizens, to, abuse employees, that would be my when I think about it, if that's really a consideration, and whether there has to be even more inquiry done onto this beyond the committee into the industry and trying to clean up the bad actors, because again, it has bad repercussions for international trade, not just within Canada.
Okay, thank you very much. That's why I ask broad questions. You get some specific answers. Ms. McCausland, your thoughts?
Yeah, I would just say I think we're pleased to see that there's a committee at the federal level to address this issue. We've been talking to industry about it for some time. We didn't know whether the right agencies, the right departments were aware of the issue, so I think building awareness. We'll be very happy to get your recommendations. The board is paying very close attention to the proceedings of this committee, and I think we'll continue to have the conversation with industry on the role that we should be playing.
I appreciate that. How much time? 50 seconds. I'll just conclude by saying to you both, thank you, and for everyone that has come here to provide testimony. Regardless of what political stripe you are, a transfer truck doesn't know if you're conservative, liberal, NDP, Green, or Bloc. It is about a safety issue. It is about an economic issue. It's about really strengthening the rules and regulations. And I think what we've learned here is that obviously there's a role for the federal government to play, but it's also a role that is kind of a joint enterprise with the provinces. So I want to thank you for this, and I really appreciate your feedback, and I'll yield the floor on that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kellaway. To our witnesses, I want to thank you on behalf of all members of this committee for your presence and your testimony on this very important study. Colleagues, I'm going to suspend for a couple of minutes to allow for our clerk to transfer over to our next round of witnesses. This meeting is suspended to the call of the chair. Meeting back to order. Colleagues, appearing before us for the second round today, we have from the British Columbia Trucking Association, Mr. Dave Earle, President and Chief Executive Officer. And from the Ontario Trucking Association, we have Mr. Mark Bilesma, Chairman. Welcome back, sir. And Jeffrey Wood, Senior Vice President, Policy. Welcome to you. Thank you for taking the time to appear before us today. We appreciate that very much. We'll get right into it, and for that, we'll turn it over to Mr. Earle for your opening remarks. You have 5 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Chair and members of the committee, thank you for your continued interest in the invitation to appear this morning. BCTA represents for-hire and private carrier fleets that operate all types of vehicles everywhere throughout the province of British Columbia. And thank you for addressing what is truly our most pressing concern. You have heard extensively about Driver Inc. and the scam that it is, and I think it's important to realize that we cannot overstate the scope nor the impact of it, and I'm not just talking about the actual scam itself. But due to the pervasiveness of this, and that it has been tolerated and allowed to exist for years, it has sent the message that regulation as a whole doesn't matter. It sent the message to operators, the cheaters, the liars, that what they're doing is not only tolerated, but this is how you get ahead. It has created an atmosphere of willful, deliberate avoidance and non-compliance, and that puts every Canadian at risk. The trucking industry is not governed by regulation, but by minuscule profit margins. Regulation that prescribes dimensions to the centimeter, and then which is not enforced, simply enforces that nothing matters. It is truly a case as if one thing doesn't matter, then how can anything matter? Successive governments at all levels have been willfully blind to this crisis. I have had the pleasure of working in this industry for 8 years, and provincially, federally, successive governments have failed to take action on Driver Inc., and this has rewarded this behavior. It has allowed and fostered a culture that has begun to seep into corners of a very proud and successful industry, and it's been incredibly difficult to watch and to try and work with decision makers who weren't willing to deal with the problems. It is only when we get to crisis points that decisions get made and difficult decisions get actioned. And I'm deeply hopeful that we are at one of these points where we are actually going to see decisions made and steps taken to be actioned. The business model, if we can call it that, of Driver Inc., is a direct result of regulatory laziness. If we want to get past this, if we want to get where we need to be, there are a few things that our members are looking for. One is that our national safety code is actually national. We have a system that works across the country for all carriers in all jurisdictions, that we all understand what the rules are, who's a good player, who's a bad player. That regulation is enforced consistently across the country, be it taxation, be it road safety, whatever that regulation is, it needs to be enforced. And the most important thing from our standpoint in terms of changing this is that beneficial ownership of companies has to be transparent. We have to know. In British Columbia, we track assets when we get into National Safety Code certifications, who owns and who doesn't, so we know where the assets go. But what we don't know is who owns those companies. What is startling is that information is readily available, but we don't collate it, we don't share it, and we don't actually get into it. And that is what we look at and say is really needed, is a real bright light into the corners to know who is actually running these companies. Members of the committee, thank you for your attention. We know what to do. We know how to do it. We just need your help, and we can get there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Earle. And now I'll turn it over to both Mr. Bilesma as well as Mr. Wood for your opening remarks. The floor is yours. You have 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'd like to thank this committee for its continued commitment to studying more deeply the issue around the changing landscape of truck drivers in Canada, and including the OTA in this discussion. The Ontario Trucking Association is a proud member of the Canadian Trucking Alliance and is celebrating its 100th anniversary of representing our members' interests this year. We support all the comments and the submissions provided to this study by the CTA. Eliminating Driver Inc. and all that is associated with it is our members' #1 priority. It's important that we acknowledge 2 major milestones that this committee has already helped to achieve in the fight against Driver Inc. Number one, the lifting of the T4A moratorium by the CRA. And number two, the commitments made by ESDC for widespread compliance blitzes and sustained program funding. OTA commends both the committee and the ministers for making this happen. These actions have given the responsible segment of our industry a glimmer of hope in these challenging times. It will be critical for both the CRA and the ESDC to follow through their plans. The focus of our testimony, which Jeff will cover off for the remainder of our time, will be on the Driver Inc. issue and how it has further manifested itself in Ontario and what still needs to be done to correct course. Jeff?
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. It's a privilege, to have the opportunity to speak to you today. As Mark mentioned, we have a number of outstanding issues with respect to the Driver Inc. file and how it's manifested. And my goal for the remainder of my time is to provide you the issue with an immediate solution. Let me be frank and upfront, a lot has been done in the province of Ontario to address this issue. However, we as the Ontario Trucking Association feel that much more must be done. We're hopeful the committee will incorporate our solutions that we speak about today in your final report. So, being solutions oriented and very direct, I'll get into the issues. So, driver license integrity is an issue in Ontario. We've seen that in the media. The Ontario Provincial Police and the Ministry of Transportation are trying to get a handle on the situation. We don't know its full scope, but we do believe work has been done. From our perspective, we'd like to understand what the situation looks like in the rest of the country and how we can get a handle on it. Our recommendation in this respect is that the Minister of Transport work with his provincial and territorial colleagues to understand the scope of the issue and how we can get a handle on it. It's important we send a strong message to everybody that our driver licensing system and its integrity is intact, and that includes our partners in the United States. You've heard from committee members with respect to the illegal parking issues, particularly in Caledon. I can tell you the issue is out of control in Ontario, and it needs all the help it can get. That's federal, provincial resources need to assist the municipal efforts. Where there are gaps or shortages of parking, we would recommend that federal lands be explored to be opened up for this. However, that has to be done under proper contractual and transparent relationships. The process that unfolded with the Greater Toronto Airport Authority should be strongly reviewed and not repeated if this is an option to open up federal lands. Criminal activity, thefts, and increasing levels of violence is an exponentially growing concern in the trucking industry, especially in the Greater Toronto area. 3 solutions from our perspective. The police need to be funded properly on an annual basis, and the funding needs to meet the magnitude of the situation, which, as we've seen in previous press conferences, is out of control. Federal policing and CBSA's inland enforcement units need to be present at truck inspection stations across the province, and both CBSA and CBP, so U.S. Customs and Border Protection, need to re-regulate the border. Forced labor and misuse of our immigration programs is a major concern. It's unfortunate that we have to say that, but it's a reality in trucking. Immediate solutions: develop a known employer program for any trucking companies accessing provincial and federal immigration programs. And the second component of this would be to develop strong industry awareness programs like that of the Joyce Smith Foundation, where there are appropriate whistleblower protections and avenues to get information to the police. Facility insurance is mandated by the Government of Ontario to be available to commercial trucking interests, and it is enabling high-risk operations to exist. We need to look at serious limitations to the use of facility, and we need to look at a restructuring of how facility is underwritten to bring it in line with the private market. We are transferring risk to other jurisdictions. We need to understand what that looks like, and we need to stop it. Fleet safety oversight needs a complete overhaul. In Ontario, 80% of the fleets have never been inspected by MTO. What's the solution to this? We need to get rid of the satisfactory unaudited safety rating category, and we need to have regular audits and inspections of all trucking companies in the province on a regular basis. The caveat, at least from OTA's perspective, is the carriers will pay for it. If it's a level playing field, it's a level playing field. We believe there are options to explore that. Roadside and driver vehicle compliance, again, the answer from our perspective is 24/7 truck inspection stations, and we have the proper lawful authorities at those locations at all times to deal with all of the noncompliance that is impacting the trucking industry. Commercial driver training, as we've heard this morning, and from OTA's perspective, needs an overhaul. We are working on that with the Ministry of Transportation. We are pleased with that progress. From OTA's perspective, the license needs to match the configuration that you're driving in a graduated licensing type situation that you've heard other committee witnesses speak about. And finally, with respect to government procurement contracts, particularly at the federal level, but certainly at the provincial level, need to have labor compliance checks incorporated into them. We have significant concerns about the practices of a number of Crown corporations and how they transfer or how they tender contracts, and we feel that this needs to be addressed. Thank you for your time. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much to both of you. We'll begin our line of questioning in this round with Mr. Muse. Mr. Muse, the floor is yours. You have 6 minutes, sir.
Thank you. Given the number of BC MPs that are here today, I'll reserve my questions for the Ontario Trucking Association. So, you know, on November 25th, the province had a news release. You were actually quoted in it, Mr. Belsma, with a whole package of action in terms of, you know, some license suspension, fines, escalating vehicle impoundments, et cetera. Has that helped to change behavior? Is it too early to say? I mean, I know there's lots more to be done.
Thank you. Thank you very much. There's very, very much. There's lots to be done. I think this is the tip of the iceberg. I think in one of our previous testimonies, somebody mentioned that it's a branch of a tree, right? Drive Rank is one branch of a very big tree. And so while we're starting to see some action, there certainly needs to be more if we're going to stop this. It's out of control, and every time you put a finger in the hole of the dike, there's another hole drilled. So,
you know, certainly Mr. Wood outlined a number of different immediate solutions or concrete steps to be taken in addition to what's already been done. Many of those are of provincial jurisdiction, and you indicated a few areas where the federal government could weigh in. Because this model, of course, still exists and is still out there. As you say, it's a branch of a tree. So, you know, what more can the federal government do immediately to address this?
I'll take that question if that's okay.
Yes.
So it's with respect to the federal government's role, anything they can do to support, whether it's on the policing side or funding side to assist the provinces would be helpful.
Previous witness talked about temporary foreign workers. There's GST loopholes. You know, yes, there was the T4A moratorium that was lifted, but there's still a lot of issues around that. Like, is there any action happening quick enough?
So again, a lot has been accomplished at the federal level, but I think if we want to look at this, it has to be evolving. So ESDC and CRA have to remain engaged in our world, keep our foot on the throttle. We can't let up on this, as these issues will morph as it goes, and we need to be prepared as government to address that as we go forward. But I think what's critical is the municipalities and the province can't do a lot of what we need to do in trucking alone. They need the support of the federal government, from the federal department certainly, and where it's a provincial jurisdiction where there could be funding allocated to help them achieve those goals and make our roads safer and the industry better and restore law and order. The federal government needs to be there.
Right. But it's been 8 years. Like, so we've moved the needle. How much? What percentage are we along the path to where we should be?
I would say with the two, the T4As and the ESDC, I think we've come a long way. I don't have a measurement.
Sure.
But I can tell you people are paying attention.
Okay.
It's getting noticed. There were requirements in place. You know, the T4A piece, it's following the money. We talked about the criminal side of this issue, and again, if from the federal perspective, you know, the Ministry of Transportation and the Ontario Provincial Police can only go so far, but the RCMP and CBSA and other federal policing can certainly play a role, and they should, and the provincial police have told us that, and I think from the federal government's perspective, that's where they can bring necessary change. It's deterrence. If everybody's at the scales and everybody's watching, it's more of a deterrent to break the rules, if that makes any sense.
Yep. Mr. Earl from BC talked about, you know, the need for at least some alignment or a national system of enforcement. What are your thoughts on that? From the Ontario perspective. So others I'm sure will ask Mr. Earl.
And I think we agree with that. Certainly it's about, and it was mentioned at the previous meeting, information sharing, harmonization between provinces and perhaps managed federally. But just that information sharing is what's going to allow us to crack down across our nation so that they can't just pop up in the next province a day after they get shut down in another province. And sharing all that information is what's going to help us eradicate this. But yeah, to your point earlier, we've seen a start, but we've got to go. We still have to pursue this headlong because it keeps getting bigger and bigger. The snowball just keeps getting bigger.
Go ahead.
I would just add on that the enforcement component needs to be given the tools to do their job. So we talked about data sharing in the databases and the information that's there. A lot of they don't have the tools right now. I think you heard from CCMT this morning. There's a lot of really good work happening, and we'll get there. But it just like we need to keep our foot on the throttle, and we need to support our enforcement, and we need boots on the ground, and they need to be supported by technology.
And is that, you talked about the criminal element in this, and it was brought up, who's running these companies? You just set up as a new shell company elsewhere. Are you seeing any enforcement in that happening in Ontario?
It's starting, but it needs sustained resources.
So there's been.
Thank you.
You can point to examples where that's happened already now.
I can't.
Time is up. Red card. Time's up. That's it.
Very powerful card, Mr. Wood. Sparks fear in the eyes of members. Thank you very much, Mr. Muse, and thank you, Mr. Wood. Next, we'll go to Mr. Greaves. Mr. Greaves, the floor is yours. You have 6 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for being with us this afternoon. I would like to turn my questions to Mr. Earls. Welcome. It's great to have a voice from British Columbia here with the committee today. One of the issues that we've heard a great deal about from many, many witnesses and keeps recurring is this question around the impacts of the T4A penalty moratorium on the trucking sector. I'm wondering if you could just elaborate on that from a BC perspective. How did that T4A moratorium affect your sector and safety specifically in the industry within BC and elsewhere?
Thank you. And there's two parts to that, I guess, is how did it affect and what has the effect been since the moratorium's been lifted? When the requirement to file T4As was taken away, what that did is it put a cloak of darkness over what was going on in the industry. Who was paying whom? What was happening? Who was going? Who was running? And where was money flowing? And that allowed a lot of money to be hidden, a lot of operations to be hidden, and it just facilitates that entire discussion around compliance and regulation. If it's important to be there, it's important to be down, then it needs to be enforced. Since that T4A moratorium has been lifted, it's not even so much that the moratorium itself and the actual mechanics of it that's important, and it is, but the message that has been sent has been really, really important and very powerful. That message is that the federal government is paying attention, that they are actually looking, that enforcement is coming. And you're going to have to pay attention, and that hiding dollars and hiding behind this curtain is no longer going to be tolerated. So that message alone has been very important.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Just this past fall, Finance Minister Champagne announced the Budget 2025 will provide $77 million over 4 years. Starting in 26-27, with ongoing funding of $19.2 million for the CRA in order to lift this moratorium that you're referring to, penalties on not submitting T4As in the trucking sector. From your perspective, if Budget 2025 was not to pass expeditiously, and these changes were therefore not to actually be implemented, what do you think the implications would be for the trucking sector and corresponding safety in British Columbia or elsewhere in the country?
I don't think it's too strong to say it would be disastrous. Because, again, there's more to this than just the actual mechanics of what's being proposed. When I look at Budget 25 and the elements of it, the enforcement of it's very important, but the messaging behind it is even more so. This industry has been left to be in malaise, and working with our provincial ministry and the regulators, they do the absolute best with what they have, but their tools are limited. And if we talk about Driver Inc. being a branch on this tree, it's a rotten one. And there's a whole bunch of other branches that we need to get in there and prune. And that's when I look at the provisions of the budget, why it's so important. It is the legislative amendments that allow for information sharing. It is the regulatory amendments that go through for enforcement. But more importantly than anything else is the message that this is important and it's going to be enforced. If we fail to do that, if we fail to send that message, I'm deeply concerned, as are our members, that not only do we continue to let this happen, it's one more message for those that lie and cheat to say, go ahead, because we can't even get this piece passed. This is just the first step in a very long road, and it's a very, very important one, and we're really, really hopeful as an industry that this comes to pass. So it's an incredibly important piece of the puzzle, that's for sure.
Thank you. Perhaps I'll ask Mr. Bosma or Mr. Wood to comment from an Ontario perspective if you agree with that assessment of the significance of not implementing the budget and thus having the T4A moratorium lifted.
So it has to happen. That's as blunt as I can be. If there's any backtracking on it, the legitimate industry will see that as a sign of weakness, and that the bad actors will regain control, or at least have more control than they have now. You can't go backwards. Please don't.
Very clear. Thank you. How am I doing for time, Mr. Chair?
A minute and a half, sir.
Oh, tons of time. That's wonderful. Well, back to British Columbia then. So, Mr. Earl, if you could speak maybe to what about the regulation and enforcement of the trucking sector in BC works well in your estimation? Is there anything that British Columbia is doing in this sector that provides a model that could be potentially adopted by other jurisdictions, or that demonstrates progress on addressing this issue?
One of the things we've talked about is, that coordination between jurisdictions. And one of the things that British Columbia does with their National Safety Code certification process is they track assets. So you, as a National Safety Code certificate holder, have to list your assets in terms of which vehicles are covered in your fleet. That is record that is kept, and when those assets move and they show up elsewhere in the NSC system, the question becomes, well, what happened? On a case-by-case basis, it doesn't really matter, but what we have seen is where we've had companies shut down in British Columbia, and they've simply moved operations to another jurisdiction. We found that what happened, and we prevented that from happening in BC, because the National Safety Code said, well, wait a minute. The office said, hold it. You've got all these assets, all of them moving from this company to this one. Who owns this? Why are these assets moving? This doesn't make any sense. There was an acquisition, and those questions meant that those interactions didn't happen. So tying those assets and tracking them and seeing where they show up with National Safety Code certifications is really important. In that circumstance, those assets eventually showed up in Alberta. And the company was operating under their Alberta certification in British Columbia.
Thank you very much, Mr. Earl. Thank you, Mr. Greaves. Prochainement, nous avons Mr. Barcelou-Duval. Vous la parole, 6 minutes.
Mr. Barcelou-Duval, you have 6 minutes. Thank you, Chair. Mr. Earl, I really appreciated what you said when it comes to corporate transparency, knowing who the real owner is of a business. I don't think that is a direction that we had gone in yet, but very quickly, when it comes to Ontario, would you be in agreement with us going in that direction?
Did you get that, Mark?
No, I didn't know it was it.
So the question was, would we be in agreement with the transparency on the ownership? 100%.
Okay.
We call it anti-avoidance, and it needs to be properly funded and resourced and put across the country consistently.
Merci. Je continue avec Monsieur Earl.
Thank you. I'd like to continue with Mr. Earl for another question. I saw an article on January 20th in Truck News. It said that during an inspection in Burnaby, in the Lower Mainland, over 56% of the trucks that were inspected were taken off-road. That's an incredible figure. Do you think that it really is representative of what's going on in the industry at large?
I hate to put it this way, but yes and no. Yes, in that the inspections that they're referring to weren't random. They're actually targeted. So they'd see trucks coming and go, oh, that one comes over, that one goes past, that one comes over, and away we go. The bigger question for me, though, and I think this goes back to our discussion about enforcement, British Columbia has a commercial vehicle inspection program that requires every vehicle to be inspected twice a year, 6 months. These vehicles are showing up with dump trucks with rotted through bottoms, steering linkage is broken. These things don't happen in 2 or 3 or 4 weeks, in 4 months. These things take years to happen. And yet these vehicles are somehow passing inspections a matter of weeks or months before. They're not being inspected. It's another scam. We have this pernicious, culture of cheating that we need to get at. This is where it starts, and it's really important work.
Merci. Puis ça m'amène justement à ce que...
Thank you. And that leads me back to something Mr. Harper said earlier. Mr. Kellaway asked if there were any angles that we hadn't really looked at, and I think we're opening up the door here to the links between these practices and organized crime. Mr. Wood, Mr. Bilsma, from your point of view, is there some kind of link between what's happening in trucking, Driver Inc., and organized crime? And if so, what can the federal government do to fight that?
So from our perspective, the signs are there. We're not in the investigative world or in the law enforcement world, but the signs of organized crime being behind and infiltrating our industry is pretty clear. So the question is, how do we resource the enforcement officials properly, and how do we make sure that everybody is going into this eyes wide open? That's unfortunately what we're dealing with. You've seen the levels of violence increasing exponentially, particularly in the Greater Toronto area. The response to that needs to be immediate. It needs to be sustained, and you can't let your foot off the throttle. We cannot. If we don't get control of this, we're in some serious trouble. And I think we want to work with this committee. I think you've got the opportunity to. We've talked about a lot of things. This is sort of the next phase of that. Having it as a recommendation that we go into this eyes wide open and that the committee understands what the trucking industry in 2026 looks like is super critical. And we basically have a major crisis on our hands, and we need to throw everything at it. Everything.
Un peu plus tôt, M. Earle a fait mention.
Earlier, Mr. Earle talked about corporate transparency. And in my opinion, this should apply to organizations as well. We have an organization that represents some carriers, and this one organization refused to send us a list of their members. They said everything is fine, it's normal to use the Driver Inc. model. I'd like to know if this type of lack of transparency, because we have no idea who is their CEO, who the members are, who's on their board. Do you think that we should trust to what they've said? This is open to anyone.
I'll speak to that briefly then. Thank you very much. And I think Mr. Kellaway in the previous session said, is this about safety and economics? And I think there's one other piece that was missed, and that's the rule of law. It's about safety, it's about economics, about the rule of law. And there's an incredible lack of rule of law today. And we don't need a lot of new regulations. I mentioned it earlier. We don't need new regulations as much as we need harmonization and support and funding for the different levels or departments to crack down. And Jeff mentioned it earlier too. If we have multiple departments at the scales, that will help. Help crack down on this. So it's not just about T4As. It's about safety, and it's about criminality.
Thank you very much, Mr. Balsma. Merci, Mr. Bastille-Duval. Next, we'll go to Mr. Albus. Mr. Albus, the floor is yours. 5 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all our witnesses for being here. I'd like to start with Mr. Earle. Mr. Earle, I'm quoting from a Vancouver Sun article about 5 months ago. A new trucking firm in BC has links to Chohan Freight Forwarders Limited, a company the province shut down after it was involved in multiple overpass crashes, a post-media news examination has found. It's unclear whether legal or Legacy Pathways Limited's links to the former company violate BC Motor Vehicle Act regulations, but the Transportation Ministry said its Commercial Vehicle Safety Enforcement Branch is aware of the concerns regarding Legacy Pathways Limited and is investigating. The province's rules stipulate that when a trucking firm's National Safety Code certificate, I think they mean safety fitness certificate, which allows it to operate, has been canceled for cause, the company and its directors and officers will be refused a new safety certificate. Companies can apply for reinstatement after 3 years. So, Mr. Earl, this is a BC company. You know, it has regulatory authorities, enforcement's put upon them, license or their safety fitness certificates canceled, and they, like a phoenix, show up again. Now, the only reason why we have this is because it was reported, but they could easily come as an Alberta or an Ontario trucking firm as well, could they not?
Yeah, and this is the exact issue that we've been talking about. That's the exact circumstance when we talked about moving assets out of the province and starting to move it into a different province. The only reason that our enforcement agency knew about this is because we track assets. We track vehicle identification numbers. But even with that, when you've got multiple jurisdictions across countries, you can just move different assets and go back and forth. Unless there is a clear and compelling, transparent national system to track beneficial ownership and directors, this becomes almost impossible to detect.
So you think it should be tied to the safety fitness certificate? Anyone applies for it? What about trucking schools? Because as we've heard, in Ontario, 66 of them were shut down. 5 or so were just closed in Alberta in the last 6 months. Could they not just simply do the same thing?
It is the exact same thing happening in British Columbia. Before mandatory entry-level training, we had about 30, 35 schools. Once that came in, we had 105 because all of a sudden there's money. Now, over time, the Insurance Corporation of British Columbia, which is the licensing authority, has shut down 67 of them.
67.
67, but we're back up to 100.
So
how
again,
it's this cycle, and this is when we're saying this is the problem when we have this. We shut it down and I open up over here. We shut it down and I open up over here. It's the same people.
So again, it's the real-time verification that's the matter here, because the lagging indicators, like with all due respect to what Mr. Greaves had said earlier about the CRA, that's a lagging indicator. The enforcement comes years after they've audited and found discrepancies. So we need to have something that is much more tactile and up-to-date. Is that correct?
Yeah, but we need both. We need the tactile and up-to-date, but make no mistake, the fear of the agency is real. And that's something that's very important.
Oh, I'm all for CRA enforcing the law.
Yeah.
And I should also note that it was the election call by the Prime Minister in March or early March or the early spring that caused the bill that you were all referring to get just went by. And now we're only getting it through the BIA, which we are working on right now at the Finance Committee.
Great.
Last quick question. You mentioned 8 years of both governments, so I assume you mean the EB government. Maybe you could just give us a little bit of indications of what things you've been saying to the EB government and whether or not they have been, because right now the federal government allows them to have complete enforcement of extra-provincial rules.
My first briefing in this role was with Premier Eby when he was the Attorney General. And it was interesting in that we got about 5 minutes in, he stopped and he said, "You're with a business association and you're asking for more regulatory oversight." I said, "Yes, that should tell you all you need to know." Is that I'm here.
And have they done that, sir, though? Like, are we still getting satisfactory no audit done?
It is. We still have that category of satisfactory not audited. We still have under-resourcing of inspection facilities. We still have scale shacks and staff that aren't staffed. We still have all the usual things, and usual is a terrible word to use, but it's true, for enforcement in British Columbia that we see in other provinces. Has there been action? A little bit. Do we need more? Absolutely.
How much time do I have?
26 seconds.
So dangerous goods, do you think that companies that hire people that have 10 years of experience should be able to qualify under a different program? I think it's Canada Fuels has suggested that it's unfair for them to invest so heavily in their drivers, but then they have the same insurance costs as everyone else.
Yeah, there's a better way to do it. The one thing about years of experience, though, is you have to ask yourself, do they have 10 years experience or 1 year experience 10 times?
Yeah, fair enough.
Thank you very much, Mr. Earl, and thank you, Mr. Albus. Next, we'll go to Mr. Kellaway. Mr. Kellaway, the floor is yours. 5 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Appreciate it, and good to see the three of you here today. And I appreciate a lot of the comments here, that it's not just a T4A issue. It's the branches of that tree are many. And I'm wondering, from each of your perspective, can you give us a sense of, there's so many different impacts to this study. There's the security, there's the personal, there's a whole host of things. There's economic, and I kind of want to land on that. Like the economic impact to the sector in Ontario and in British Columbia. You must have a quantifiable or best guess of how much this is costing the industry in terms of the lack of enforcement, the Drivers Inc. model. Do you have a definitive number or an estimate of what it costs Ontario and Quebec, or Ontario and BC rather, in terms of the sector?
We do, but again, it's based on very limited data.
Yeah.
And then we extrapolate it out. But it's significant on a per driver basis, whether it's a Driver Inc. driver or whether it's somebody that's potentially engaged in forced labor. The money is it's very lucrative. It's very lucrative from a damage to the supply chain perspective in terms of distorting operating costs. It's significant. So if you're looking for a specific number that we've seen, again, this is based on data that we've seen. It's about $40,000 per year per driver on the Driver Inc. model. That the cost is reduced, or your operating costs are reduced, and unfortunately, and I don't say this lightly, in the forced labor piece, it's about $80,000 per year per driver. Okay. It's substantial. Again, that's based on data. It starts with WSIB, or workers' compensation. Mm-hmm. And they indicate whether it's misclassification. That's where our data analysis has started. Okay. But it's significant. If I look at the total scope of companies assessed by WSIB in Ontario, which works out to about, let's say, 35-40% of the fleets that WSIB has gone. And we have a freedom of information, so we get this information. It's very we have to be very careful about what we do with it, how we deal with it. But I can tell you, when you extrapolate out the damage, at least what we've seen for the 100 fleets that have had to pay or have been assessed, their ability to manipulate the supply chain in the Canadian context is in the range of about $300 million annually. This is manipulation of the cost structure. And then if you translate that into the U.S. space, it's about $330 million U.S. Okay. So you asked about the damage. It's very difficult. So you're asking also us to recreate a criminal's balance sheet, which is very difficult to do.
No, I appreciate that. Yeah.
But it's substantial, and you extrapolate that out to the scope of, and that's when we talk about the money, that's what a lot of these organizations are chasing. It's easy money, and they'll go for it any day, all day.
Right. Mr. Earl, would you like to comment, or Mr. Bosman?
Sure, and I guess when I look at that, that's the best data we're going to have on that element. The other element that's very tough to get into is the follow through on the rest of the industry. And we're talking about road safety. We're talking about the pain and misery caused by incidents. We're talking about all those things. And then what everybody else has to do to try and compete. So, I mean, we talk about those hard costs, and again, you get into the extrapolations, and we're into many, many billions of dollars.
Mr. Bosman?
Yeah, our membership is made up of obviously many different sized companies. Some people have 10 trucks, some people have 1,000 trucks. Spring Creek Carriers, who I was here representing in the fall, we have just over 40 trucks. I've done the math, and it would add 10% to our bottom line if I converted to the Driver Inc. model, just to see like what is my competitive disadvantage.
Right.
That's 10%. 10% is in an industry where we have razor thin margins.
Yeah.
That's the difference between making a lot of money and losing a lot of money.
Oh my.
So from an economic perspective, just from one small company, that's
okay. Yeah. I have a yellow card.
Yeah.
So I got to hurry up. But thank you for that. I wanted to get that on the record. And I know you're not law enforcement, but you mentioned around the bad actors that are out there. that is it safe to say, based on your observations, I'm being careful how I word this, that it's mostly the same people, like the same bad actors based on your experiences in your own neck of the woods? Like it's the same people understanding how the system works or doesn't work and consistently breaking that? And I know that's a tough one, but just based on your experience.
I would say it's anybody in that 30 to 40% of the market that can figure out how to make it work.
Right.
So it's significant.
Yeah.
And the level of criminality progresses. It's all, yeah.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kellaway. Prochainement, nous avons Mr. Barcy-Duval. 2 minutes et demie, s'il vous plaît.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. In your opening remarks, Mr. Wood, you mentioned that you have concerns about the government procurement system. And you mentioned crown corporations. So one thinks of Canada Post, but other crown corps. Last week, we voted to invite Canada Post to come testify here. So what do you think we need to change in that regard?
So thank you for the question. So government procures a lot of transportation services, so they offer a lot of revenue opportunities to the industry. One of the things that we think needs to happen, particularly in Crown Corps, because they're supposed to be, holding up the values of what our country's about, is we need to do the labor compliance checks in the tendering process or in the contract process to make sure they're not using driver ink, especially to make sure they're not using forced labor. Significant concerns. So those two checks, I suggest to us, it's a no-brainer. We don't understand why it's not happening. And we don't understand, when we ask these questions, the types of responses we get.
Et j'ai une autre question, toujours par rapport à Emploi et Développement Social Canada.
I have another question. This is especially in relation to Canada Post, because there was a study on the fines, and we realized that the vast majority of fines were not paid. So is there the fact that a lot of companies that don't pay fines disappear? What's the effect of that, and is there a solution?
Sorry, with respect to not paying fines for traffic violations or collisions or... Well, everybody's, if let's use this analogy, if you do the crime, you got to do the time, or you got to pay. So I think it's important, if you have, and again, this goes back to the data sharing and mechanisms, if you don't have the stick or the mechanisms aren't there to penalize people that are doing things the wrong way, and that includes, you've got significant levers. I'm happy to explore them further with you.
Thank you, Mr. Wood. Merci, Mr. Barcy-Duval. Prochainement, nous avons Mr. Groslo. Mr. Groslo, la parole est à vous. Vous avez 5 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Bonjour, chers invités.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Bilsma, you're the president of the Ontario Truckers Association. In Quebec, people are very worried because in some driving schools, drivers get their licenses in less than 24 hours. Is that normal in your opinion? And what is the right amount of time, or how long do you need to get a proper training?
That should not be normal, no. And we have, throughout Ontario and then later other provinces have adopted it, and I think Mr. Earl mentioned mandatory entry-level training, and there's regulations around that. But if people are taking shortcuts, we need, again, without oversight, the regulation means nothing, right? So it's about, if we have regulation, how do we make sure it's being followed? So we talk about, if you're going to go for lunch later on this afternoon, you go to have a hamburger or a steak or a salad, whatever you're going to have, you know that restaurant was inspected. Yet your families or your kids are in a school bus driving beside a truck where the driver may have gotten his license in 24 hours. That's unacceptable, absolutely unacceptable. And those are the reasons why we're making the recommendations that we are in our report.
Quel mécanisme vous suggérez pour corriger ça partout au Canada?
And what kind of mechanism would you suggest to correct this throughout Canada?
As far as licensing, I think, yeah, we've got that in our recommendations in front of you, but it's going to require minimum standards. It's going to require graduated licensing for particular types of vehicles that you're driving. Am I missing anything else?
No.
Deuxième question pour vous, Monsieur Baisma. Il y a beaucoup de...
Another question for you, Mr. Bilsma. There have been a lot of accidents between Ontario and Quebec. Do you think that heavy load carriers should be able to speak a little bit of English and a little bit of French in order to get licenses?
I think safety is probably the number one piece if they are trained properly. And I think communication is important. I think they're starting to crack down on that south of the border in the U.S. But if they can drive their vehicles safely and they can speak one or both of our languages in Canada, that's helpful.
OK, merci. Croyez-vous que les communications entre les
Thank you. Do you think that communication between provinces should be improved, especially when it comes to interprovincial checks, when it comes to licenses, to insurance? And I know that you mentioned that in your recommendations, but what is the main recommendation that you would make to improve communication?
I think it's a matter of harmonizing everything and making sure that all of the jurisdictions and departments, both provincially and federally, are on the same page, and they're all focused on the same tree full of branches. Like every one of those branches needs to be focused on, instead of, and that's why I started my comments with thanking the CRA and thanking the ESDC, because that's the tip of the iceberg. But we need to continue to pursue all aspects of the criminal side of this, whether it's tax evasion or whatever criminality is involved. But we need every aspect of federal and provincial governments working together.
Ça fait plusieurs semaines qu'on est dans cette étude, puis je vous pose la question aux trois.
We've been working on this study for several weeks. This is a question for all three of you. What concrete actions should the government take today to make sure that our roads are safe?
So, again, federally, support the Council of Ministers of Transportation, the ministers responsible for transportation and highway safety, and all of the programs that are under their purview, namely CCMTA. That support needs to be there. The boots on the ground enforcement needs to be there. An overhaul of the training needs to be there, and with particular emphasis on the real-time availability of all of the data points that are in National Safety Code, including insurance, is critical.
Merci beaucoup.
Merci, Mr. Groslo.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Groslo.
The floor is yours, sir. You have 5 minutes, please.
And thank you to the witnesses. It's rare that we have 33% of MPs around a committee table, being from British Columbia, so I thought I'd take advantage of that today. I'm not a regular member here, but I have been listening and very concerned. As was stated earlier, I was just thinking about the safety, and Mr. Balsma talked about sending your kids on a school bus and worrying about them. My children have now started to gain their driver's license, and I always worry about my son. I always say to him, I'm not worried about your driving, I'm worried about what's happening elsewhere too. But being from British Columbia, I just wanted to ask Mr. Earl, are there existing provincial tools that could be used to aggressively discourage the driver ink practices in our province?
Thank you. And yes, there are. And to a large degree, the province is doing what they can on that file, because a lot of that does rest federally. Provincially, though, what sticks out to me, we ran a combined roadside check effort back in May. We had 2 different checks on a couple of major highways, the Coquihalla network. And what was fascinating, I thought how nice it was to have 7 different agencies and 107 inspectors present. And as I was driving back, I thought, wow, we had 7 agencies and 107 inspectors present. We still have the issues that we have. It's more than just doing the work, it's the messaging behind the work. And I know I've said that a couple of times, but I can't stress how important that is. That messaging to the industry is so important, and then the follow through. So yes, there are things that are being done at a provincial level, but so much of it rests federally. There's only so much they can do.
And speaking of coordination, I just want to know how important the coordination between the Ministry of Transportation, WorkSafe BC, and federal agencies is in addressing a misclassification.
Yeah, it is very important. They all have different lenses and they all have different social purposes behind their statutes and their regulations. But yes, the information sharing is a little less transparent than we believe it should be and can be. In particular, WorkSafe BC does take a very narrow interpretation of what they can and can't release. We're currently in discussions to get information that our counterparts regularly get from other compensation systems in Canada. But that sharing of information is incredibly important in terms of creating some level of consistency and veracity right throughout all the enforcement schemes.
And where do you see the gaps in information sharing that allow non-compliant carriers to continue operating?
We just don't know who they are and where they are. And what I mean by that, it sounds silly, but we administered a program on behalf of the province, and it was through the good work and diligence of one of my staff that found that 3 companies that were notionally completely separate were actually the same ownership structure. They simply changed directors, changed address, changed physical work locations, but he recognized addresses. So it's that type of thing. Now, if we've got a staff member in my shop recognizing addresses, we can do a lot better with data sharing and data mining. It's just a matter of making that happen.
Should BC consider tying carrier licensing or safety rating more closely to labor and employment compliance?
There has to be an evaluation in terms of where we're going when we talk about compliance. One of the things when we talk about compliance, we've talked a lot about LMIAs and temporary foreign workers. It's really important to recognize that not everybody who was involved in that system was problematic. We have a member in particular, he did amazing work in terms of providing surrounding services when drivers came into the country and did some really good work in that circumstance. He was audited by CIC every year. However, when we had a referral to CIC to a company who had 20 approved positions and had a declared fleet of 2 trucks, they never got visited. I mean, that's astoundingly ludicrous. And it's because one member, you can go have a nice cup of coffee in an office. The other one's a P.O. box in the middle of the Fraser Valley. We can do better, and we have to do better.
Yeah. I think I only have less than a minute. Just an open question to anybody can answer. What would meaningful progress on this issue look like within the next year? So I'll allow anyone to answer that question.
So again, our 2 main asks: get the scales open 24/7 and make sure everybody gets inspected. It's easy to do.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Grant. I see that we're 5 minutes ahead of time, and if you'll permit members, I'd like to ask a question as well before we conclude. Witnesses, in a previous meeting, we had some very emotional testimony delivered by 3 parents who lost their children in trucking accidents. And one of the proposals that was put forward by one of the mothers was the idea that if there's a trucking accident that involves a fatality, that the driver of that truck automatically be suspended pending an investigation into the driving history of that truck driver, but also that the company itself have an inspection done before that truck driver and perhaps the company can still have some trucks on the road. She was shocked to realize that the day after the accident, that the same trucker that took the life of her child perhaps was on the road again, and that was allowable. So the question I have for you is, would you support the proposal put forward by that mother to make it so that it's mandatory until an investigation has been concluded in that driver's driving history, and an investigation be done, an audit be done of that company and the equipment of that company? Would you support that?
If I could, we have a similar issue in terms of suspending, and we've tried this in British Columbia around overpass incidents. I mean, we've had this again and again and again. More regulation doesn't get better results. It's the enforcement of that regulation. What we saw with the bad players that were hitting overpasses, they had their license, they had their operating certification suspended, they had all these different things suspended, and they were operating the next day with impunity. So more regulation doesn't necessarily get us to where we want to be. We have to have effective enforcement. And so, that's really what we're looking at. certainly, I mean, I'll defer to my colleagues in terms of that, but I can speak from the British Columbian experience on that type of enforcement, and that type of regulation. Without effective enforcement, it doesn't change behavior. And that's what we really need to see.
Okay, Mr. Wood.
Thank you. So excellent question. So the company piece, no question. No question. Anytime there was a fatality in Ontario in the past, automatic. MTO was in there, like ripping the place apart. We have to get back to that. But I think if MTO is in there all the time, we're de-risking the situation. I think with respect to individual incidents, the police have a process to do their investigations. We can't circumvent that. If that needs, and we learn from these, and there's a method to my madness here. If we learn from the investigations, we can do better. Right now, we don't get any information from the police, for the most part, on what lessons learned. It's not like the NTSB, who produce detailed reports. We don't get that information. We've tried to intervene in that process with the NTSB unsuccessfully. I think as your committee writes its recommendations, I think if we can get those two pieces in there and put some parameters around them, absolutely. We need to figure out what's the information from the collision telling us, what's the data telling us, but no question we have to look at everything.
So we need more inspections before?
100%.
And afterwards,
proactive and learn from our mistakes.
Okay. Thank you very much on behalf of all members for your testimony today. This is a very important study, which you've extended, as you know. We appreciate it. And if you ever want to come back or share anything else with us, by all means, feel free to do so. Colleagues, the meeting is adjourned.